There's always an interesting stigma around games that go off the beaten path from the typical genre fare. Even before people get their hands on it, there's always doubt about whether it can leave a lasting impact, as the hook or gimmick that exists seems to overshadow the core of the genre that players love. The key to success, in my opinion, is understanding what works at the core of the genre, how it applies to your unique situation, and ignore what may be typical that doesn't work with your game, while applying it with what it does strongly. Fashion Police Squad releases on August 15th, 2022 for the price of $19.99 on the PC, specifically Steam. It's a first-person shooter that takes you into the world of Trendopolis, where fashion crimes are the utmost priority. Socks with sandals, ill-fitting pants, horrible Speedos, all in the jurisdiction of the Fashion Police. But before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher, No More Robots, for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? You play as Sergeant Dez, a stylish officer who's hip with the kids and everything that I am not when it comes to coolness. He's the equivalent of a beat cop in a world where fashion seems to be everything, despite the fact that it's sort of unclear what the level of punishment for each of the crimes are. Does wearing baggy pants get you community service or 10 years? No idea. Regardless, you're dropped into a mystery, as there's an uprise of colorless suits, annoying Karens, and everything that would make you cringe if you were to go out into what people call the real world. While fighting these smaller fashion crimes, you come across a bigger scheme that may affect the entire fashion world, even up to the RuPauls and the Coco Chanels. You do that by using an arsenal of 5 guns over the course of 12 main missions and several side missions, eliminating these fashion disasters in around 5 to 7 hours of playtime. While 5 guns may sound low to many of the veterans of the genre out there, alternate fire modes and the general structure of the game does reasonably well to support the smaller selection of guns, even if I wanted maybe 1 or 2 more in the end. The guns range from a typical assault rifle of needles in the tailor-made to help those oversized business suits of the up-and-coming businessman to be a little bit more fitted. Then you have things like the sock gnomes that claw at the feet of anyone who dares to wear socks and sandals. Many of these weapons follow in typical Saturn patterns of weapons in FPSs. A wardrobe launcher is a rocket launcher. The 2-die 4 Elite is like a small spread shotgun, and each of them will need to be mastered with their own little quirks in order to succeed. You do also have a belt, which can be used to stun enemies, and more importantly, open up windows of opportunities against enemies that are giving you problems. You can hold the charge to get a more powerful stun, and the belt can also be used to grapple on flagpoles to move around a little bit. Finally, you have your ultimate fashion fab glove, which allows an invulnerable time of judo chopping the bad fashion out of enemies. You earn a little bit of fab by killing enemies and doing little things, and once you get 100%, you could use it at any point. Right off the bat, one of the big differences from most other games in the genre is that enemies have very specific weaknesses to them. So much so that only 1, maybe 2 guns will actually hurt them. The game does justify this very well in the flavor of the guns, immersing you as you try to deal with each enemy. Got a guy with an ill-fitting coat? Bust out the tailor-made. Got a scooter dude who is way too neon? Absorb the color with your 2-die 4 Elite. Guy in a Speedo and Crocs? Hit him with a fabric grenade to cover him up, use the tailor-made to fit him, and send some gnomes at him to deal with those Crocs. Now, some of you who have played Wolfenstein Youngblood may be wincing at that idea, as enemies only taking damage from particular weapon and ammo types didn't work well there at all. However, it works here and works well. It helps first of all that the only weapon that has ammo is the rocket launcher equivalent, despite some preview images showing that the base weapons had ammo at one point. But this makes sense from a game design perspective. The game isn't going for ammo conservation and resource management like most other games, only really having the wardrobe launcher fall into that category. But more so, it's the enemy numbers, combination, and level design that force you to prioritize key enemies while dodging others in order to take them down. A good mix-up of ranged and melee enemies and attack patterns force you to adjust on the fly, and each fight ends up feeling pretty mixed up through the game's life cycle. Taking a DJ down while he's buffing other enemies and getting ready to drop that beat that's a little bit hard to dodge is critical in some cases, so getting in to start damaging him with the wet ones is great, but getting close enough to stun her with a sock gnome is even more important. However, maybe in more open areas with more ranged enemies, that DJ can be just stunned with a gnome while you focus on the bigger damage dealers. This isn't a one strategy fits all scenario, and it's something I really appreciated about the game's design. In general, this chaos follows a more classical take on the corridor shooter, and is about 85% effective in the grand scheme of things. Levels dart between short corridors, with some room to move around in, and a good spread of enemies to deal with, to very compact indoor locations that can cram enemies in like sardines, especially when the game gets to the halfway point in the campaign. For the purposes of this review, I played on the equivalent of hard, where there's 4 difficulties that boil down to easy, medium, hard, and extreme. While the game started a little slow in the first few levels and challenge, once it got to level 3, I started to die here and there. In the later levels, those deaths would really ramp up, and I'd really have to take advantage of positioning and enemy spawn knowledge, which they always spawn in the same points, in order to survive till the next checkpoint. The chaos is fun and is rewarding, especially when you get through a battle by the skin of your teeth, only to realize you got another one right around the corner. Enemy AI is basic, but basic in what you'd expect from a corridor shooter, and there's enough variance in attacking with ranged enemies that you can't just dodge one way and expect 100% success rate. It works well with the level design and enemy numbers in general. With that said, there is a little bit of roughness around the edges of this gameplay, and many of my gameplay issues are minor grievances that do add up to some frustration over time. Enemies spawn in the same location regardless of where you are, so if you just so happen to be standing on top of where a scooter guy is spawning in, well, tough shit, you're taking damage. In addition, some of these encounters can be more finely tuned when it comes to the spacing and the enemy numbers with a small area. Some of my more frustrating deaths came with a third wave of enemies spawning in a very small room. I'd run around and try to avoid damage, but would end up getting stuck on a tree or another enemy and start to lose that precious health that I've been protecting so valiantly. Once in a blue moon, the game would also have an enemy go out of the play area, especially with the young resume hawking dudes that teleport around. You can get them to come back if you're patient enough, but it can be frustrating when one dude is simply teleporting back and forth behind a locked door, taunting you repeatedly as you wonder whether to hit the restart checkpoint button. There was also a bug in one level where, despite defeating everyone, the game didn't progress, and part of me wonders if one of those buggers got out of the map. I actually had to start the entire level over. Even going back to the checkpoint, it actually kept on happening to me. As for boss fights, however, they're a highlight. They do a great job of pushing your limits while being familiar enough to be able to take them on, which is what I would hope from an FPS like this. Obviously, I wanted more than a couple, but the care put into these fights was really appreciated and helped to top off a surge of adrenaline that the game would make you feel during these fights. Just be patient with the last boss in terms of your partner, however. That's all I will say on that. Of course, like those old FPS games like Doom and Quake, there are secrets around the map that give you extra health and armor, and maybe a nice picture of the protagonist in iconic video game clothes that made me smile and laugh. There's a good balance of secrets that reward exploration or looking off the beaten path, without being overly hidden where you're smelling every pixel trying to find something. Now, there are sections of the game that focus on more movement or a special mechanic, and this is where the game can stumble a tiny bit. Two big ones come to mind. Sections where you need to use your belt to swing from flagpole to flagpole, and using the wet one's ability to speed yourself up to jump bigger gaps. Now, movement can feel okay for the most part in these sections, but there's definitely not a lot of wiggle room at times when it comes to accuracy. Hitting your belt key a little early will mean you'll have to do a section again, and that's fine. But your momentum can sometimes be hard to judge, especially with the belt and the speed you grab something with along with your direction. It's a bit better with the wet one's speed boost once you get a hang of it, but its precision, especially on one of the challenge levels, can be difficult to control, especially in the horizontal direction. Now look, it feels close to being good here in terms of these movement options, but it just misses the mark and doesn't feel as refined as some of the best in the genre. With all that said, one of the biggest things that Fashion Police Squad does in the big picture is world building and using its simple yet sleek presentation to immerse you in this fantasy world of fashion faux pas and terrible tailors. The atmosphere here is dipped in the world of pop culture, as you'd expect for a game that's centered around fashion, but it's the layers of depth that will draw your attention. The game's various references are numerous, mirroring classic brands like Crocs, Burger King, and Amazon in great parody bits. A good amount of the unique enjoyment you'll get out of the game is stopping and just seeing a billboard, getting a wide range of reactions such as, "Oh, that's cool," to belly laughs that made me stop playing for a second or two. The game also made a wise decision in not holding back on its cheesiness. Puns and corny parodies aside, the game is defiant in how much it brings in from all forms of pop culture, where it embraces even what some may refer to as cringe or uncool. Yes, some enemies will floss after you help them embrace their new fashion. And while I'm an old grumpy man, most of the time at least, and would probably slap the person in real life, it works well here, especially with everything else that's going on. It does help that the game samples from several decades of popular trends, going back to good old references like "All Your Base Are Belong to Us" and more. One of the highlights in particular is the sort of runway at the end of the levels. The fact is, it gets some laughs. Just look. It's fun. The game does feel alive and vibrant thanks to this and a great use of color, especially in the mechanics and flavoring of the game. Meeting Deep Coat for the first time and having that noir feeling on the screen sets a great mood. Then follow that up with neon lights attacking you, will have you smiling from ear to ear even though you're jumping around like Mario chasing Bowser. A good amount of why it is so effective, however, is the sound design, in particular with what enemies yell and do while attacking you. Sure, simple things like the honk of a scooter horn is cute, but it's things like the young prospective employee hawking his resumes like he's hopped up on caffeine, having that sense of desperateness in his voice that corresponds with his fast and teleporting nature that sells you on him. I have to emphasize the sound design does so much to really enhance the game that this is not the type of game to put a YouTube video on in the background on. You'll miss the wonderful narrator saying those special lines as you defeat an enemy, or a reference that one of those Karens will make regarding managers that you'll appreciate. But this all doesn't get in the way of the audio of hitting enemies with a shot or the cues of an attack incoming. So all in all, fantastic design. Seriously, just listen to some sections here, and you'll hear what I'm talking about.
Things on display. Right, one attacker. Rare things on display. In hindsight, are you slacking off? Loans due. Cover list. Here's my
Let's not forget the funky, fresh music that corresponds with the action. It hits a range, but generally, I'd put it in the funk jazz club vibe, and there are tracks here that really stand out when you just sit back and listen to them. A good mixture of instruments help keep the variety up, and you'll appreciate things like a piano solo that's so crisp and satisfying that you'll want to take up the piano and or keyboard right then and there. You can just see being a third party watching the protagonist here and listening to his shots in time with the music. Almost action movie-esque in that. Look, the best way I can show you is to have you listen and hear what I'm talking about.
special attack. Password 123. New coordinates. Thank you for your contribution. One. One. Thank you for your contribution.
Story-wise, I put this writing to a level of an episode of a sitcom, focusing on good jokes, simple plot lines and twists, and nothing special in terms of quality, but still entertaining overall. It's definitely enhanced by the overall atmosphere of the game, setting up punchlines nicely, but it's not going to be something that you'll remember in a few weeks' time, other than some good jokes. Overall, Fashion Police Squad shows that a clever take on the FPS genre can entertain you from start to finish, as the chaotic challenge will push you in new and interesting ways, yet still be familiar at the same time. The atmosphere of jokes and fashion puns are the highlight here, and the game oozes style, and a lot of the game's shortcomings are little frustrations that build up over time. It's a game that you'll appreciate when you put down. Maybe not sticking with you for years to years, but will definitely be a game you'll recommend to others for a good time. It's solid, just missing the cusp of a must-buy, scoring an 89 out of 100. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and tries to match the game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. In the case of Fashion Police Squad, most everybody is going to enjoy some element of this, and only a small segment of the audience will want to skip this game, but even then, that's a very, very small element. That's it for this review, but coming up next on the channel is Treehouse Riddle on the Nintendo Switch. That should be later this week, at least I hope. Trying to get 2 reviews done in a short amount of time when I've got a full job and everything, yeah, that can be a little bit tricky. But if you want to see that review and aren't subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And if you like this video, hit that like button, or leave a comment down below on how I can make these reviews more useful to you. I'm not going to say more entertaining because, well, my personality, unless if I started doing reviews with Vlad. Don't think my voice would be able to handle that. Regardless, I will see you next time. And as always, keep on gaming.